when it comes to canning, you might want to treat it the same way as cooking. So sometimes when I'm cooking, you kind of look at a recipe and you're like, I don't have that. Let me add something different. And you throw something in there. Canning is totally different. We talk so much about following the recipe, and there's a reason why. But sometimes when you are looking through those canning recipes, you might still wonder, can I do this? Can I do that? So let's go over some of the things you can possibly substitute or not to help you have a better understanding of following the recipe and what is best when canning. So sugar, this is a hot topic, but when canning fruits, the sugar is there to help preserve the color, texture, flavor, and you can safely reduce the amount of sugar in one of those recipes, but just know it will change the color, texture, and flavor of the end result. So when canning whole fruits, you want to vary the level of sweetness, and you're thinking, that recipe calls for a batch of syrup. You can choose which version of a batch of syrup you want, and even maybe omit the sugar fully, as long as you're following a recipe. And the Blue canning book has syrup recipes you can follow. For like salsas, you can substitute a hot pepper for a regular pepper, or you can change the seeds, no seed, yes seeds, to help you change the heat level. So just be aware of that in those kind of recipes. For a salsa, you can reduce the amount of sugar or salt in any tested salsa recipe, but know obviously that the flavor will be impacted in the end result. Do not ever change or reduce the type or amount of acid that's used in a tested recipe. When it comes to tomato recipes, you can add the appropriate amount of acid for tomatoes based on the recipe. So always just follow that. Do not add low acid ingredients or change any of the ingredients on that recipe because it could change the pH and be an issue later. So keep that in mind. Remember, once you've canned something, okay, and you open it later for use, you can add more salt, seasonings, spices, that sort of thing. But when you're actually canning the recipe, stick to it, just to make sure you don't alter anything. If a recipe calls for dried spices, you can, this is fun, you can add more of the desired spices and that won't change the recipe. So for dry spices, you can add or change those up. So never add flour or cornstarch, or don't try to thicken any type of tomato recipe. Don't do it. In a tomato recipe, you can substitute red, yellow, or white onions in that recipe. Pickles, I love pickles. You can safely swap white vinegar for apple cider vinegar in those recipes. For jams and jellies, don't assume you can just substitute any fruit in a recipe unless the tested recipe says you can. So for example, we think peaches and nectarines are similar, but there are differences in the pH and when it comes to their peel and other factors. So don't just swap out things just because. There is a berry jam recipe in the Bluebook, and it has 8 different berry options you can pick from. So that's an option where, hey, if it says you can pick from different ones, do that. If not, don't do it. You can use unsweetened, frozen, or canned fruit in the place of jam or jelly recipes, but do never use sweetened, so always unsweetened. Don't double a jam or jelly recipe unless you want it to be like syrup, so don't just assume you can double a batch and it's gonna end up the same way. For jars, so you can choose if you want a wide mouth or a regular mouth. It's kind of up to you, just depending on what you're making. You can decrease the size of a jar, but you always must process it for the amount of time of the larger jar stated in the recipe. There's only exceptions when the approved canning recipe tells you that it has been tested for a larger size, and then you can do that. So keep that in mind when you have your jar sizes, your ingredients. So these are like little tidbits to just keep in mind that will hopefully help you as you're making some of these recipes of what you can and can't do, so the end result is safe, delicious, and looks wonderful, and your family is gonna love every bite.